In this Post NHL Trade Deadline 2021 special, we gather our experts, Justin Emerson, Ian St.Clair, David Dwork, and Christian Arnold, to break down the biggest trades, which ones made the biggest impact, and which two were simply baffling. Hit the music. Welcome to Jablam Sports Hockey, folks. I'm your host, Peter Borjaranov, and the mic is always on. You can find me on Twitter at Russia98. You can find the full show at Jablam Sports. If you have any questions or comments, please tweet us. Use the hashtag Jablam Sports. That's JABLAM Sports. Please subscribe to us if you haven't done so yet, and click on the three dots in your podcasting app. Share our show with three hockey fans you know. Thank you, everyone. Remember, check out our website, go to jablamsports.com, see all our podcasts, and even game notes for each episode. You'll get links to all the things we mentioned on this show, including guests. For our podcasts, click on podcasts, and then hockey on this show specifically right on our website. First up, our East and Central Trade Deadline Roundtable. We have on the show Christian Arnold. He's the editor-in-chief at New York Islanders Hockey Now and the co-host of Hockey Night New York. You can find him on Twitter at C_Arnold01. And David Dwork. He covers the Panthers for WPLG Local 10. You can find him on Chirping the Cats podcast. You can find him also on Twitter at David Dwork. So we'll get to some Panthers and Islanders chat, but let's talk about the biggest trade everybody's talking about, and that's the Capitals acquiring Anthony Mantha from the Red Wings for Jakub Vrana, Richard Panik, a first and a second. Woo! That's a big pull. Stevie Y, working hard. Is it, I don't know, just for myself, Christian, I find it a little bit baffling. I already think Jakub Vrana is already a more skilled player. I don't know if it's just me, but I think he's going to be even more outstanding in the future. How does this make a good move? Is Mantha right now the better player for the value and for the playoffs, I guess, for them?
I mean, for the value, I don't know, because they gave up a king's ransom to get him. And I'm kind of with you. Is Mantha really that great where you've improved as a team? I think the jury's still out. I think there's a lot of hockey people around here that are kind of scratching their head because the move really, when I look at it, I don't go, oh, wow, the Capitals got really great with that trade. I kind of got, all right, maybe they got a little bit better, but if anything, maybe it's a lateral move at best. Just because of what they're bringing in. I know Mantha's a talented player in his own right, but he's never a guy, and maybe it's just because he's played in Detroit and he kind of gets lost there. But he's never been a guy that I've really watched and went, wow, that's a guy that I need to give up, a lot of pieces for to bring to my team to make better. So, it certainly, I think, surprised a lot of people. And I think if you ask most people around here, the Capitals are a great team. Don't get me wrong. And Mantha's going to a good team there. It's fighting for the first place with the Islanders. But it didn't make them a more, scary team in this area, at least from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. It feels a bit more of like an RFA type next contract move, or are the Capitals already looking at Seattle? David, yeah, go ahead.
I think everyone's been looking at Seattle. Sorry, I mean, I cut you off there, but no. I think everyone's kind of had that in the back of their mind as well, because that's kind of the harbinger that's kind of cast a shadow over this entire trade deadline too, aside from the fact of the flat cap.
Yeah, I think he called it right there. Was everybody has been focusing on the Seattle draft. I think that what happened with Vegas caught a lot of people, I don't know if by surprise, but certainly perked up a lot of ears. Obviously here in South Florida are a little bit more sensitive to it, considering kind of the big part of that whole draft with Marchessault and Riley Smith and all that. But I mean, when I saw that trade, I was just like, wow, I didn't realize Anthony Mantha was so valued in the hockey circles. Like I was surprised. As Christian said, maybe playing in Detroit kind of casts a little bit of a veil over that skill, perhaps. I know the Bruins are hoping so with Taylor Hall. But yeah, I was more surprised than anything else when I saw the return for that deal. And no knock on Vrana. He's been a great player for them. He's proven that he can perform in the postseason as well. So it's not a knock on what did come back. It was just so much, right?
Yeah.
And a first round pick.
I guess we're all baffled at that. A thing we're maybe not so much baffled is the Florida Panthers bringing up a versatile winger in Sam Bennett, who's usually a guy who will step up and give you what you want for the playoff run, and only for a 6th round pick, and also acquiring the 6th round pick. But to Calgary, they traded Emil Heineman and a 2nd round pick. Is this the perfect fit for the Panthers, David?
I mean, it's a good fit just because of the style of play that Joel Quenneville incorporates with the Panthers. It's a lot of puck possession, some grit, and some skill, and that's basically Sam Bennett in a nutshell, right? He's a guy who, he can control the puck, he can control the pace. He's not afraid to throw his body around at all, and he's a guy that has shown he's one of those players that takes their game to another level when the postseason arrives. I was thinking about it the other day. You think of like a Justin Williams type of player, or going back even further, like a Glenn Anderson was for the Oilers, and then for the Rangers and later on in his career, but guys that just take their game to another level when the playoffs start. And with Sam Bennett, I mean, look, he's a former 4th overall pick. He's been playing in the same place in his entire career. So obviously he's had that weight above him for a while now. And now he gets to go to South Florida. He gets a fresh start. Bill Zito said yesterday that they wouldn't have done this if he wasn't in their long-term plans. Bennett's RFA. So I imagine they're looking at giving him some kind of a deal this summer. And yeah, it just seems like a good fit. Florida needed some more depth, and Bennett provides that and then some, because we know, while his numbers maybe haven't been there, we know he's a skilled guy. And I don't think he's going to be that counted on to produce so much in Florida, as much as just kind of keep the ship steady.
And they followed up by bringing in Brandon Montour to maybe fill in half of the skates of Aaron Ekblad. Is this even remotely good enough as a replacement?
Well, I mean, you take away a guy who was considered a possible Norris candidate, so you're not going to replace him with more than 2 or 3 other guys in the entire league. But that being said, the Panthers, they're a team that succeeded this year based on the way that they apply defensive pressure, the way that they have their defensemen push the pace of the play. And I think that's something that Brandon Montour can do quite well. I think he's a mobile defenseman that can hang on to the puck and push the pace, which is what Joel Quenneville is going to ask of him. He's not a liability in his own end. He's certainly not a great defensive defenseman, but he's not somebody who's going to be coughing up pucks in his own end or costing his team in that way either. So while he's certainly, nobody's going to replace an Ekblad, Montour can fill those shoes to a certain extent. He can help out on the power play, which has struggled since Ekblad went down. So you would think that Montour helps out there, as well as Nikita Gusev, another guy that Florida brought in. So it may be not one guy filling those skates as much as a committee approach, but I mean, that's really what other option is there when you lose a guy as valuable as Ekblad?
There were a few inklings, and I wanted to just hit me in my head again, about Drieger possibly out there. Was it at all out there? And was it maybe to fill in again somewhere on the blue line or anything like that?
Yeah, I think Drieger's name was out there just because as the deadline approaches, you start looking at potential targets, and Drieger, backup, essential backup goalie on a UFA deal. He's going to get paid this summer, and Florida's not going to be able to keep him in all likelihood. So it just obviously presented itself as a situation where Florida could, if they wanted to, perhaps try to extract some value for Drieger. But at the end of the day, I think they went the safe route, and what I would have done as well. You have this amazing insurance policy in Chris Drieger. That, if something happens to Sergei Bobrovsky, you don't have to worry about an unproven youngster like Sam Montembeault coming in and having to play the game. Or you didn't have to bring in, like a Jonathan Bernier or a Devin Dubnyk, somebody like that. And also, for what it's worth, the last 8-9 games, Florida's alternated goalies each game. So it's not like they've been playing with one true starter all year anyway. So ultimately, I think Drieger was a flashy name, as I think he will be in a few months when the season ends, but it just wasn't worth Florida to give up that insurance policy.
The Islanders had a similar go with a couple goaltenders for last year in the playoffs, didn't they, Christian?
Yeah. I certainly know a thing or two about that. That's for sure.
Yeah, we love Thomas Greiss here in South Florida.
I think everyone loves Thomas Greiss everywhere. Everywhere he's been, he's a hard guy not to enjoy. And I think you've spent a couple of minutes with him. I mean, every goaltender that I feel like the Islanders have always been fascinating people, truly fascinating people from a standpoint of just off the ice things. Even thinking back to some of the backup goaltenders in the past, it's always been a fun group. I will say that.
And of course, Blue had to make a big move, splash early, kind of starting up the deadline almost a week ahead with bringing in Kyle Palmieri, Travis Zajac for a couple of names nobody knows too well. Mason Jobst, AJ Greer, a first-round pick, and a conditional fourth. How have they looked so far?
I think the Islanders have gotten exactly what they wanted out of that deal. Travis Zajac was playing on the Islanders' top line yesterday on Sunday against the New York Rangers. Kyle Palmieri scores his first goal against the New York Rangers. First goal as an Islander, I should say, against the New York Rangers. They've looked exactly how you want them. They've fit in well. They're getting those opportunities on the power play. Special teams units, both sides special teams units. So when the Islanders went out and made that deal, that was exactly the types of players they wanted. Not only in the sense that they wanted guys that, they needed, a top line winger that can score, and Palmieri fits that bill. This season, obviously, it's been a little rough because he's played in New Jersey, and we've all seen how bad New Jersey has been. At least it wasn't Buffalo, but it was pretty bad still in New Jersey. So, the scoring production hasn't necessarily been there, but he's consistently been a 20-plus goal scorer. Then you look at Travis Zajac, who is a veteran forward, a good face-off man. They've utilized that. They utilized that on Sunday against the Rangers when they had him actually taking a majority of the face-offs over Matthew Barzal to great success. I think he had like a 75% success rate in that game or something like that. They played the two of them on the same line in those first two games just to kind of get them acclimated to being on the Islanders and the style of play that the Islanders utilize. But I think all signs have pointed in a positive direction. And now that they're kind of giving them an opportunity to play with different line mates, putting Palmieri on the line with Oliver Wahlstrom and JG Pageau, I think has done wonders for him. You already saw score a goal pretty quickly in the, on the power play with those kind of opportunities. So it's benefited them. And again, like I said, the fact that they have that kind of depth at center again, where you kind of have a couple guys on the same line now where, you don't necessarily have to rely on Matthew Barzal to go out there and win a big faceoff. You have a veteran guy who, if you need him in a big spot, he can go out there and take the faceoff, and then they can kind of move around. They're both versatile players, and that's something that the Islanders really, really value when it comes to the guys that they bring into the room, and of course the character aspect of it. And Lou Lamoriello knows them both very, very well from his time in New Jersey. So, they all kind of fit the bill. Zajac was a bit of a surprise in that move because I think everyone kind of honed in on Palmieri, but Zajac got thrown into the mix, and that kind of seemed to seal the deal. And like you said, the Islanders, all they really had to give up, the first round pick may have been the toughest pill to swallow, maybe. But I mean, if the Islanders want to stay in the cup, no one's going to care. And Mason Jobst and AJ Greer were not two guys that were high up on anyone's pecking list when it came to prospects within this organization. I think, honestly, the way you put it is probably the nicest way you could have put it, in that two guys no one's ever heard of. Even here, people who cover and follow the Islanders.
Yeah. With Anders Lee, the captain, out for the season, are these two the right fit in terms of bringing in that more leadership role on the team, and they have that experience?
Oh, absolutely. I think the one thing, if you look at the players that the Islanders bring in, I've said it a couple of times on my podcast and to other people as well. The character of that player and that person is equally, if not almost more important than the actual skill set that they bring in. You look at a Leo Komarov, for instance, who is someone that Islander fans cringe every time they hear his name and see him on the ice there, especially when he was playing on the top line with Barzal and Everly. But there was a certain characteristic that he had, leadership wise, experience wise, and his play on the ice that Barry Trotz and Lou Lamoriello like. And you look at everyone on that roster, the people that they bring in, part of, in my opinion anyway, part of the success and why they've been so good the last couple of years is that they bring in people that fit the character of that room. And it just meshes. You look at Pageau last year, he came in and, here was a guy who, he probably never stepped foot out on Long Island outside of maybe the Marriott across the street from the Nassau Coliseum. And there was a guy who was committed to being an Islander for a very long period of time and buying into what the team was preaching and the community and all that. And fit in like a glove in that locker room. And then I think you look at Palmieri and Zajac, they come in there and they fit that same bill. Two guys who, you right from the jump, you got the sense that they're excited to be here, that they'll fit that room, they'll fit the character of that room, and that be a great complement to that group that they already have there. And the leadership aspect, you're talking about two guys who've been in very, playoff pushes. They've been kind of seeing it all. And, you can't have enough guys like that in the locker room. And I think they, as tough as it is to fill a leadership void like Anders Lee, they're certainly in the right direction when they bring in guys like Palmieri and Zajac to do that.
The Sabres quite possibly made maybe the second biggest move at the deadline, but looked like they had their hands tied. Taylor Hall, Curtis Lazar to the Boston Bruins for Anders Bjork and a second-round pick. He had the no movement clause. Was there anything Sabres GM Kevyn Adams could even do here, Christian?
I think from all indications, it sounded like he had his hand, like you said, he had his hands tied. He kind of intimated it when he spoke to the media in Buffalo. Taylor Hall made it pretty evident that Boston was the place he wanted to go. I was saying the other night, I'd love to know the teams that Taylor Hall would okay going to, because it certainly seemed like a short list that he would agree to go to. And if any of those teams were actually interested in bringing him on, I think kind of the interesting aspect of it here is that, we kind of for a little while heard kind of these character flaws or these certain murmurs that he wasn't a guy that teams necessarily wanted to bring. You look at the haul that the Islanders gave up, so to speak, for Zajac or Palmieri and Zajac. And teams seem to, and I think there's another team that was trying to get Zajac as well. Teams certainly seem to value those types of players. Where Hall, it seemed like either everyone knew that he wanted to go to Boston and really, weren't putting their best foot forward, or, they just weren't interested in bringing him in. And even in the move to go to Boston, I look at that move and I don't feel like Hall fits the Boston system, because when you look at the two teams, we've seen Boston a lot up here in New York, or down here in New York, I should say, where, they play sort of a similar style to the Islanders. When you look at the way both teams play, it's a very physical brand of hockey, defensive-minded brand of hockey. And, the Islanders have played it better this year, but I don't necessarily know if Hall fits that bill that is going to be for him to be successful in Boston. It was kind of my same feeling about the idea of bringing him to the Islanders. Obviously, it's a flashy move. He's obviously a star player in this league and has the ability to score, but I just didn't think he fit the bill. But it certainly seemed like his destination was Boston, and he was determined to go there. And Kevyn Adams really didn't have too much of a choice in the matter. It was just trying to, I guess, get the best deal possible in this situation.
Yeah, I actually have I took a picture of Hall's GPS device from the summer, and it already had Boston in terms of favorites for number one destination. So he had that ready, locked in. The car was set. It was ready to go on gas. It was going to Boston. He had exactly detailed how long it was going to take for him to get there, and he was eager to leave. It just seemed like
it certainly seemed like it. And it's unfortunate, too, because Buffalo this time of year is absolutely beautiful. So he's really missing out on the best time of year to be in Buffalo. So but I don't. I guess it seems like that was the place he wanted to go to. And it's interesting when you think about it, this year, Boston's kind of been in a weird spot. As far as teams that are going to, have a chance to win the cup, going into the year, I would have said, oh yeah, they're the hands down favorite in the East Division. Right now, your favorites are Washington and New York, or the Islanders. So it's an interesting situation with that in mind as well, why Boston would still kind of be up there as far as his top choices.
Yep, and they still have Tuukka Rask, who's a bit of a question mark with how everything went in the bubble last year and how the fans are right now, and him being injured. So we'll have to see, and I will be excited to have you guys on the show again during the playoffs. So stay tuned for the playoffs coming up in about a month. We'll see. We don't even know when the playoffs are starting, do we? So we'll find
Great
out.
question.
You can find Christian on Twitter at C_Arnold01 and David at David Dwork. Thank you for stopping by, gentlemen.
Yep. Take care.
And for our second half of the post-trade deadline roundtable, we are covering the North and West divisions. Let's get some analysis from Ian St.Clair. He's the lead writer at Colorado Play. You can go to the website, playcolorado.com, and you can find him on Twitter at Ian St.Clair. And of course, Justin Emerson's joining us again. He's a Vegas Golden Knights hockey reporter for the Las Vegas Sun and Las Vegas Weekly. You can find him on Twitter at J15Emerson. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Happy to be here.
Awesome to be able to talk Avalanche and Golden Knights hockey with you.
Yeah, we're going to talk about them, but we got to talk about the amazing North Division first, all right? All right, they've made some major moves.
Yeah, any hockey conversation has to start with the Leafs. Yeah, that is the rule.
That is the rule, all right? Come on. Obviously, the North Division wasn't that much action of this trade deadline, and the North Division was one of them that didn't have much major moves, except for the Maple Leafs. Kyle Dubas making a few moves, and one of the big ones, of course, was first off acquiring Nick Foligno and Stefan Noesen for a first-round pick and 2 fourth-round picks. The first and the fourth go to Columbus, and the other fourth goes to the Sharks. So that helps them, of course, for the cap for Nick by involving 2 teams and them taking on, obviously, 25% of that cap hit for the rest of the year. They also pick up David Riddick from the Flames for a 3rd-round pick. Justin, do you think these are the right moves for the Leafs, at least?
Sure. I mean, this is a good year for the Maple Leafs. I mean, they don't have to go through Boston or Tampa in the Atlantic Division. So going out and getting a guy like Foligno and, making these moves and kind of pushing the chips in for this to be the year, I think makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, if you're going to do it and you're going to trade a 1st-round pick and you're going to go get some guys to load up for a playoff run, I think now is kind of your time to strike.
Ian, you've seen Foligno play. Is he the right player for the playoffs?
I mean, it can't hurt, right? I mean, I think if you're going to go all in, this is the way to do it. You make a move that you feel is the best to do it. And I think Dubas feels like Nick Foligno is the guy who can help put his team over the top. I mean, obviously you have Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, but to add some scoring punch like that and a guy with a little bit of attitude, I think it can't hurt the Maple Leafs. I think in terms of the next couple of years, you wonder what this means, especially if they don't succeed in the playoffs, because I think to get to the Stanley Cup final, I think they're still going to have to go through Tampa Bay. But I think this move helps them shrink in the gap with Tampa, because I still think they're the favorite to go to the Stanley Cup final. And I think whether or not they end up playing Vegas or Colorado, that's a discussion to be had. But I think it definitely helps this season, and I think it puts them in the conversation and will make them competitive.
With the rest of the division, there wasn't any major moves. Are you guys surprised at all with the Oilers or the Jets not making any moves?
I'm a little surprised, I guess, that Winnipeg didn't go out and get a defenseman. But at the same time, who were they going to get? I think they were kind of locked on to Matthias Ekholm in Nashville. And once Nashville decided to stand pat and even add a little bit, I just don't think that there was necessarily that defenseman. What defenseman really moved this offseason? I guess Savard did, but he obviously wasn't available to Winnipeg after he went to Tampa. So that was, I guess, the one surprise that I had. And Edmonton, same thing. I mean, they could go get a depth guy or whatever, but I think they needed kind of a bigger punch than that. And once the top guys were off the board, I don't think it necessarily made sense to go out and make a trade just to say that you did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with that. So I think it's going to be an uphill battle for any of those teams to compete with Toronto. And I don't know if there is a move that would have drastically improve their odds of competing with the Maple Leafs, aside from what they have now.
So are they all finally going to get past that first round? Are we expecting them to get to the third round at least?
Well, I mean, just strictly speaking from somebody in the States who doesn't have any rooting interest in the Maple Leafs, it would kind of be funny if they didn't. If this was kind of the year, right? And it's like, they probably will. They're looking at playing Montreal, I think, in the first round is kind of what that's looking like. And that'll be fun just from a hockey fan perspective. But, you know, Toronto's a way better team than Montreal. They should win. If they don't, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how Toronto reacts to that. I guess we'll just put it that way.
What's interesting about, if you look at, since I cover the sports betting industry, and it looks like it could be happening in Canada finally, but DraftKings especially, they have, for the Stanley Cup champion, for the Stanley Cup, they have Toronto tied with Tampa Bay. Well, actually, it's a little bit less. Tampa Bay is at plus 600, Toronto is at plus 800. But I think absolutely they should be the favorite to make it through that first round series if they end up going against the Habs.
Yeah, if you look at betting and you are a Leafs fan, do not touch it. Just do not. The odds are always totally against you, and they play the odds lower with the Leafs because they know how many people are Leaf fans and that will bet on it, and it's just an awful way to go. All right, let's go to the Colorado Avalanche, obviously picking up Devin Dubnyk from the Sharks for Greg Pattern and a 5th-round pick. Is this a move that needed to happen, Ian, especially with how last year's playoffs went?
Well, it needed to happen because Pavel Francouz is out for the rest of the year with a hip injury. So to be able to get somebody who has played the goaltender position and relatively well, especially in the playoffs with the Wild, I think it did need to happen. Hopefully he's not going to need to get on the ice, and Philip Grubauer is going to be able to remain healthy, which is something that he wasn't able to do in the bubble last year. So I do think from that perspective, it'll help to have Jared Bednar have that security blanket in case something does happen to Grubauer. So that will help, but I don't think in terms of what they do in the playoffs, it shouldn't have that much of an impact.
And they weren't done as well with bringing back Carl Soderberg from Chicago for Dickinson and Rolston. What are they getting from Carl this time around?
I think when you look at Colorado, one of the things that's talked about is, are they tough enough? Do they have the fight, the attitude that you need to have in the playoffs? They obviously have the talent. They have the depth. They have the defense. They have the goalie. Do they have the attitude and the toughness to compete in the playoffs? And I think that's where Carl Soderberg comes in, because he's been with the Avalanche. He knows this roster. He knows Jared Bednar. He's going to be able to add that punch to potentially give them that attitude, because obviously you have it with Nazem Kadri. There's a couple of guys, JT Compher, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. They offer that, but not to the level that Soderberg does. So that should help in that regard. When it starts to get dicey and physical in the playoffs, he'll be able to help.
Was Soderberg almost on the way to the Golden Knights, Justin?
I don't know about almost on the way, but when I was looking at possible trade targets, I thought Soderberg made a lot of sense. They're kind of, that third line needed a boost. They ended up getting Matthias Janmark, but I think that a center and somebody that can kind of get to the net, and that was a big narrative coming out of last year's playoffs, especially in the series against Dallas, is that they didn't do a good enough job getting to the net, that they had a lot of skill, but they didn't have, I guess, enough sandpaper, or however you want to put it. And Soderberg's a guy who you can plant in front of the net and take shots at. So that would have been an interesting choice, but obviously he went to Colorado. So Vegas might end up seeing him in the playoffs anyway, just on the other bench.
You mentioned it. Matthias Janmark goes to the Golden Knights on the 3-way deal. 5th-round pick and 2nd-round pick. I'll go, and a third as well, go to Chicago, and a 5th-round pick goes to San Jose. Is Janmark not the right fit? Or Soderberg would have been better, or how do you feel about that?
I think Janmark's a good fit. I mean, he's not 2 years ago, they got Mark Stone. Last year, they got Robin Lehner. I don't think Janmark's going to be a difference maker on that level. And if he is, Golden Knights are going to be very happy with that. But no, I mean, he's a guy that fits onto their third line. He's fast. He plays good defensively. He can put the puck into the net. They needed help on that third line. Alex Tuch has it seemed at times kind of been trying to do it on his own, and his teammates couldn't keep up with him at times. So I think it was a good pick. A second, third, and a fifth is a lot to give up for that guy, especially considering he's a rental. But the Golden Knights had extra picks in all of those rounds that they traded from. So, I mean, that's why you get draft capital, is to use it. I don't think when they traded for some of these picks that they had ever intention of picking amateur players with them. They were going to use them for trades, and they cashed him in on Janmark. That's a guy who's, he doesn't maybe move the needle too much, but it is what the Golden Knights needed, was just another good player to put on that third line.
Was there a hole that you think that they didn't fill that maybe should have been filled?
No, I mean, it was the third line. That was their most obvious hole. They like their fourth line with Reeves and Carrier out there. Their top six is set. Defense is good. They got Pietrangelo last summer, so it's hard to add a defenseman after you get Pietrangelo last year, and even Alec Martinez at last year's trade deadline. Goaltending's good with Leonard and Fleury, so the team was pretty set. Just a little tinkering, I think, was needed, and I think that's what Janmark was.
The Blues and, of course, the Wild didn't make any real moves. Are you excited about that, gentlemen? Ian?
I'm not. I'm kind of surprised that Bill Guerin didn't make any moves with the Wild, just because that's what he's known for, right? I mean, he comes in and just makes his imprint. He wants it to be his team. So a little bit, not with the Blues. I don't know if they're going to be really competitive. They may have an opportunity to get into the playoffs. We'll see. I think it's going to be an interesting battle with both of those teams. I think the Wild are more likely to get in. So a little bit with the Wild, not so much with the Blues.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Wild are kind of an interesting spot, because I think that if you pump them full of truth serum and ask, are you better than Vegas and Colorado, or are you coming out of the West? The answer is probably no. I mean, it doesn't mean that they can't, of course. Like, Minnesota has played Vegas very tight for a long time, for all 4 years of Vegas's existence. But the Wild they had an extra first, they had an extra third. I think those both came out of the Zucker deal with Pittsburgh. So they could have traded from a spot of depth, but if you're also taking a long-term look, you're looking at your window just opening if you're the Wild. And, you've got Kaprizov this year, you're going to work on getting him signed, and then you kind of want to build off of that. So maybe if it's not, if the Wild were to lose to Vegas or Colorado in the first round this year, I don't think it's a disappointment for them. And I think that they're going to be building towards something for a while. So while I kind of agree with Ian that maybe they could have or should have made a deal, I also understand where they're coming from in not making a deal this season.
It was a very quiet deadline. I guess we all saw this happening. Were you guys at all shocked, Ian?
I think the move that kind of shocked me the most was the Kings moving on from Jeff Carter. I think that move to Pittsburgh was the one that kind of shocked me the most. Obviously, there was the big move between the Capitals and the Red Wings. I think that was the biggest move of the trade deadline. And still, growing up an Avs fan, I mean, the blockbuster deals, the trade deadline deals came and were known because of Pierre Lacroix making all those deals in the late 90s and early 2000s. So anytime the Avalanche don't make a move like that, it is somewhat surprising, because Joe Sakic was around, obviously, as the captain for those teams. They were able to get Theo Fleury, Rob Blake, Ray Bourque. So I guess in a sense, but in terms of the Avs, not really, because I think, like was said about the Wild, I think Joe Sakic realizes that he has a team that can compete now, but he also likes to look into the future and not give up draft capital just to make a move, or give up on young prospects just to make a move. So it is a little surprising that bigger moves didn't happen, but I think that's to be expected with everything that's gone on the last year because of COVID-19 and teams just wanting to see how everything plays out.
Yeah, I don't think there was necessarily a player that didn't get moved that I thought would. Like, we all knew Taylor Hall was going to get traded. He was kind of the biggest name, even if it wasn't the biggest deal or the biggest return that came out of it. I think Boston's kind of a perfect fit for him there. So yeah, and on to Vegas, the same thing. Like, you can't as much as they've tried, you can't get a star player every chance you get. But so no, I mean, the trade deadline, nothing. I mean, the Mantha deal to Washington surprised me. I didn't think that was going to happen, but that's something that, from a Vegas writing perspective, like, you're not going to see Detroit, you're not going to see Washington until at least the third round. So you got to, you're more concerned about doing what you can to kind of get through the Avalanche in what is likely going to be a second round matchup this year. So, if you're Vegas, you're happy that Taylor Hall didn't end up on the Avalanche or something like that. But overall, pretty boilerplate deadline, I think.
You can find Justin on Twitter at J15Emerson and Ian at Ian St.Clair. Thanks for having both of you on.
Yeah.
Thanks Peter.
I want to thank this week's guests, Ian St.Clair, Christian Arnold, David Dwork, and Justin Emerson. It was great breaking down those trades. I'm excited for those Toronto Maple Leafs, and as well, I won't be surprised if the Islanders go deep again with the additions that they made. So it's going to be an exciting next month, and then the playoffs are kicking in. Wow, only in a couple more weeks. So gear up, folks. It's almost playoff time. Next up, we go back to our trending nows and our team ISOs. So check that out. Again, thank you all for joining me. Remember, if you've enjoyed anything you've heard in this episode or don't, please tweet at me or even our guests. You can follow me on Twitter at Russia98 or the entire team at Jablam Sports. If you want, you can also contact us on our website. You can use the hashtag at Jablam Sports, Jablam Sports, that's JABLAM, and our website is jablamsports.com/contact for our contact page there. Please check out our website. Go to jablamsports.com to see all our podcasts and even game notes for each episode, including this one. And you'll get our guests' info and links to things we mentioned on this show. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify. And of course, click on the 3 dots in your podcasting app and share this episode with 3 friends you know. Please and thank you. Also, follow us on our Facebook group, Jablam Sports. Check us out, folks. Thank you, everyone. And to every one of our listeners, I'm giving you a virtual hug. Stay healthy, listen, be yourself, and stay strong.